G'day you mob, welcome to this episode of the Goss, where I sit down with my dad every single week and talk about the news and current affairs going on in Australia, but also more broadly across the face of this planet. So today we talk a whole bunch about all sorts of different topics. Obviously we keep talking about the coronavirus and give you a bit of an update on that, and fights that have been breaking out in Woolworths across Australia over toilet paper. We talk about how dogs are being used to sniff out cane toads that are invading bushland that was burnt in the bushfires. We talk about Australia's very first poo bank, right? Get this. You can now be paid $25 to poo for medical purposes. So you'll have to listen to find out more about that. We talk about Cockneys announcing Miley Cyrus as the official rhyming slang for coronavirus. We also talk about scientists and how they're tracking funnel web spiders using these minute little trackers. And lastly, we chat about a loggerhead turtle and how on earth it ended up coming back to Australia from South Africa after living there for decades in captivity. This is an absolutely awesome episode, guys. It is chock-a-block full of content. And don't forget, if you would like to get the transcript for this full episode, if you'd like to use the premium podcast player whilst you're listening to this episode to read everything that's said, and if you'd like all the other downloads and the rest of the video for this episode, make sure that you either sign up for the premium podcast membership or academy membership, where you'll get access to both of those. Anyway, guys, poke that kookaburra and let's get going. Dad, welcome to the 11th installment.
Yeah.
Of the
Past
Goss.
double figures. We've done well, yeah.
Crushing
we've
it.
managed to do this every week. I can't believe it. In fact, I think this is the 11th episode in 10 weeks. So
Yeah,
'cause we
possibly. We did a
one
double
week.
one, didn't
Yeah.
we? So, how's your week been?
Busy.
What's the goss?
Busy. I've just come back, hence the all hot and sweaty. I've just come back from a salt marsh walk with a botanist, part of the Festival of the Sea at Barwon Heads, which is an annual festival they have of celebrating being on the ocean.
Yeah.
But also the estuary there. So they ran a workshop this morning, which is just looking at Ramsar wetlands, which was a convention from the 1970s, an international convention from the 1970s to preserve wetlands, particularly for migratory wading birds.
Yeah.
And as part of that, then salt marsh areas, which are the sort of borders of those, are obviously going to be protected or at least hopefully preserved as well. So we were looking at a bunch of salt marsh plants, which is always interesting because it's being an intertidal marine biologist. I've spent my life looking at rocky shores, but it's the same principles, but suddenly you've got mud and plants. That was what today was.
So what do you find so interesting about wading birds? Why are they such a popular bird for bird photographers?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that they're bloody hard to distinguish, to tell apart. We've got, loosely speaking, depending on how you define wading birds, but loosely speaking, there's 50-something species in Australia. 35 or 36 of them, I think, are migratory, and they breed in other parts of the world. One species in New Zealand and the rest of them from the deep northern hemisphere, so Alaska, Siberia.
That's such a weird thing, isn't it? That the distribution is kind of two pockets.
Yeah,
right,
they do
of the
summer
planet.
and summer, basically.
Yeah, but that they don't have a continuous distribution where, they're obviously going to fly from somewhere like Alaska to Australia, but they're not really stopping in any other locations for a significant amount of time.
No, they
right?
basically stop to feed for a few days and then go to another place. Some of them just fly. There's one species, the bar-tailed godwit, which has been using radio and satellite tracking technology. They've tracked a few of them that will fly from Alaska to New Zealand in one stop. Just one hop.
How do they manage that?
Because
they're so tiny, aren't they, as well?
Their godwits are
big
reasonably
birds.
large birds, but some of them are tiny.
But they're not
one.
pelicans, right? You would imagine, you
exactly.
think of animals in the ocean that go large distances, and they don't tend to be anchovies. They tend to be things like whales, right, that have huge fat stores that can take
and so
them
some of them, like red-necked stints, which are the smallest species, migratory species that come to Australia, they weigh, by the time they get here, they're weighing under 25 grams. So they're the size of a sparrow. They're a little bit bigger than a sparrow, but they're lighter than a sparrow.
That's an ounce,
Yeah.
right? Like, so
Yep.
if you had an ounce of gold in your hand,
Yep.
which is, a tiny little
That's
thing,
right.
that's the weight of the bird.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Jesus.
5 teaspoonfuls of water.
And so what did they leave?
So-
What were they when they left?
They can put on 70 to 80% of their body weight
Yeah.
before leaving. So they breed in the tundra, basically, in Alaska and Siberia. And they can put on about 70 or 80% of body weight before they fly over here, and they'll lose most of that coming here.
Are they flapping like crazy when they make these things, or do they get
have
into
to.
wind
These
currents
are,
and then they just coast?
Apparently they fly from 3,000 to 8,000 metres high.
Yeah.
So they're not up in the jet stream,
Yeah.
which airplanes tend to fly in. But
Well, they'd probably suffocate and freeze, right?
They would, they'd freeze, and they simply wouldn't have enough oxygen there. But 8,000 metres is fairly high.
Mm-hmm. Well, you get a warning. You got a while to fall before you crash into the ocean.
You do, you do, yes.
You can take a rest for a few kilometres, and then you can just you can come back up.
But they're little flapping birds. The bigger ones can glide a fair way.
I just find it astonishing that they can travel such large distances in the air, because you would imagine that requires so much more energy than doing it in the ocean or by land.
I know. It's sort of one of those things where if you think of it this way, they fly at about 60 kilometres an hour.
Yeah.
And if you were to get in your car and drive at normal suburban speed, 50 to 60 kilometres an hour, and think, I've got to drive 10,000 kilometres at this speed, non-stop, or maybe 2 stops for a little feeding refuel in around the Yellow Sea, so Korea and China. So it's
but that's why they're so interesting, because
firstly they're interesting because they're migratory. So the fact that they're not here all the time.
Yeah.
So they're only here over our summer, and from spring until early autumn, and then because they all look the same. Mostly, other than size differences, they're all little brown mottled birds with a few odd differences, because by the time they get here, they're no longer in breeding plumage. Their breeding plumage is much easier to distinguish them. But by the time they get here, they've molted and they're no longer in breeding plumage. So it's just a bit of a challenge to identify them. And look, I think the other thing, certainly for me, I can't speak for all photographers, but just being down on mudflats and sandy beaches and things, it's a nice place to be. It's a fairly pleasant place to be.
They tend to congregate in areas too where you have a lot of different species that you can photograph simultaneously, right? So it isn't just you in the forest and there's a lyrebird and nothing else.
And you might or might not see it.
Yeah, these things tend to be
and they're in hundreds or thousands.
Yeah.
So that in itself is entertaining to look at as well.
I guess the main reason I wanted to flesh this out a bit to learn about how they migrate is because I want to know more about how they do that, because I have a story later on that we'll get into about turtles and their migration, large distances. But how do these guys migrate such big distances? Are they using land marks as signals? Are they just, are they using the sun or the moon in order to use celestial or what would you call it? Yeah, celestial navigation, or are they doing it with the magnetic, what is it called? The magnetic poles,
field of the Earth.
Field of the Earth, yeah.
I think at the moment, my understanding,
or do we not know?
My understanding of the science is that those are all legitimate hypotheses, none of which has ever been proven.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a black box as to working it out. Because all of those are possible, except for a couple of species like some of the bar-tailed godwits that will fly just directly across the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
So they're obviously not using landmarks as such.
The water.
Yeah, let's aim for Tahiti.
Go for the next wave.
Yeah, exactly. But it could well be any of those things. And so I don't think anybody is really sure.
Yeah, you wonder how you work that out too, right? Yeah. You would have to somehow maybe equip them with an instrument that would disrupt something like magnetic waves, which I don't know how you would get ethics to do.
No.
And then see, do they maintain their course? Can they find their way? If you could put on some kind of electromagnetic disruptor on their head, and there you would have sort of indirect evidence that, okay, well, they're clearly using these
and look, I think
waves.
When you're doing that sort of gross migration where you're traveling huge distances, you're basically traveling from polar region in the north to sort of lower temperate zones in the southern hemisphere. Basically, you just head north.
Yeah.
Or you head south. And then, so it doesn't mean that you have to track along exactly a route. You're not trying to follow a particular route. You're just saying head south, and then there'll be various correction mechanisms, whatever they are, to get you to the spots that you want.
Some of the hardest parts of conserving these sorts of species that have such large distributions, or even, broken up distributions across multiple countries or even continents, is that you need to have all of this discontinuous habitat kind of conserved to maintain them, right? Because if they're coming from somewhere like Russia through Southeast Asia into Australia, you need all the places they stop to be conserved, because if one of those fails and they land there one year, the whole species could go kaput.
And that's certainly happening it's the group that we have coming here, because there's various flight paths around the world of birds migrating large distances, but the East Asia, Australasia flight path, which basically goes from that sort of Bering Sea with Alaska and Russia through Siberia, China, Mongolia, down that coast through Southeast Asia into Australia. Yeah. There are 21 countries that the birds are potentially going to fly through and land on. And China and South Korea have had a lot of urban development going on around the seashores for a long time, and reclaiming mudflats, because historically people look at mudflats and salt marshes and those things and go, oh, this is just useless. And so we can fill it in, put concrete there. So it certainly can happen where birds will go from one year to the next, and they'll stop at mudflats on one time, then come back the next year and they land on concrete. Yeah. And so if they're exhausted and they're starving, they're dead. They can't go on any further. So there's some really interesting work going on in China and South Korea at looking at creating large floating feeding habitat for them. Yeah. So that if we're going to have humans that are actually taking over the shore, they can effectively create an artificial mudflat that's floating on the ocean.
Really? Wouldn't it get disrupted by waves or anything like that?
It may. But the thing is, if you're doing it in areas with mudflats, then they're low energy areas in terms of waves. So it's not like you're going to put it out on a surf beach. But I only just heard about it, so I haven't seen how much work has been done on it.
At least they're keeping that in mind, right? Yeah. I guess the other thing to mention here before we get into the news was, remember that funny story I think I shared with you a while back on the eagles in Siberia? So I think there was a Russian team there who was studying these big-ass, huge eagles, and they put SMS trackers on them that would send messages via the phone line.
That's right.
To tell the researchers where these birds were. And I think the thing that blew their minds was that they started researching them wherever it was in Siberia. I can't remember if it was on Russian soil or Mongolia or whatever. But they put all these trackers on something like 24 birds, and the researchers went bankrupt because I think
international rates on their text messages.
They had no idea how far thousands of kilometers individual birds were flying, and their territory was massive. And I think the reason that they got charged so much money was that they went to Iran. And as soon as they crossed the border, the cost of an SMS was like $1.50, and they were getting messages every hour or something for weeks at a time. So
lots of birds.
They had to crowdsource money to pay for the rest of the experiment.
Telephone bill.
But I love that sort of story with species like that, where you see them in a certain location and you imagine that they're just, they live here in this neighborhood, and then they do that kind of research where they find out that the things travel thousands of kilometers, or vice versa. I think they found a study recently in Australia showed that feral cats have actually much smaller ranges than was previously expected.
There's just lots of them.
Yeah, they thought that they were transient across the landscape, like nomads that would just go wherever and eat wherever. Maybe make a den when you're going to reproduce, but, as you would probably expect with leopards or lions, they have a discrete territory that they stick to. And that's, important information with fighting feral species or conserving, endangered species that you're worried about.
For things like cats, they're highly specific in the way they capture food, but they'll eat almost anything that they can get hold of. And so if they're in a forest area, as an example, they're going to get a lot of food without going very far. If they're out in farmland, depending on rodents and reptile populations and those sort of things that they're likely to capture, they may have smaller or larger territories. Their territory is just going to be really the size of it will be based on how much food they can get access to.
Well, and it's pretty sad. I think we have anywhere between 3 to 9 million cats that are wild, that are feral, which is something like 2 to 3 times the number of pet cats.
Yeah,
and they each kill something like 3 animals a day.
Yeah, and who knows how many foxes we have as well.
Yeah, annually we're losing billions of animals. Like, we think the bushfires cleared out 1 billion animals as on estimates, but that's happening annually just from cats alone.
Yeah.
So anyway, getting onto the news, I guess I got a few things here before we get into the deeper stories. Harvey Weinstein has been convicted and got 23 years in jail.
23 years, and he says he's been unfairly dealt with. Like, seriously, Harvey.
Do you find it amusing that both Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby suddenly became disabled when they had to go to court?
Oh, well, they're not the only
charges?
ones. There are several examples of those. They pull a I'm too sick to go to court, and then they end up in court and they still keep up the sick act. You're sort of like, well, do you think this is going to affect people's decisions, whether you're guilty or not?
It's not going to hurt, right?
No,
I'm blind, So Bill Cosby showed up with a cane, I think, suggesting he was blind, looking for the sympathy card, and Weinstein had a frame all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly.
that he'd never been seen with outside of prison. Yeah, so good riddance. Enjoy your stay in jail there.
Yeah, well,
Harvey.
he's not going to be coming out.
Well, not until he's 90. Yeah. COVID-19, so the coronavirus,
the weekly update on coronavirus.
Jesus Christ, I'm looking forward to this not being in the news anymore.
Just stay away from Tom Hanks. All the best, Tom. Hope you get well soon.
So Tom Hanks has got it, and he and his wife both were tested positive for it on the Gold Coast in Australia. And WHO, the World Health Organization, just declared it as a global pandemic. And another article I just saw before was that a coronavirus conference has been cancelled because of the coronavirus.
Yeah, how ironic is that? Yeah.
And the toilet paper stuff, did you see the fight that was going on in it was a Western Sydney Woolworths between 3 ladies.
Yeah.
So it's been going crazy. Even here, like, it was funny because we saw the memes going everywhere on the news and on social media, and you think, oh, it's just a few places. And then all of a sudden we went to the supermarket here, and I was so embarrassed because I was like, well, I better buy some before it's gone.
Do I walk down the toilet paper aisle?
Yeah. And it was saying one thing only, 1 packet of toilet paper only per person. And the same with hand sanitizer, flour.
Well, hand sanitizer in one of our local supermarkets now, if they have it, they'll have it at the service desk. So you have to go and ask for it. So they'll give it to you. You won't be able to go and take it off the shelves.
It's interesting that they care. You would imagine that the stores would just be like, whatever, we'll sell more of it.
Yeah, well, the thing is they won't sell more.
It'll just keep getting taken out.
Yeah, because they'll just sell what they've got.
Yeah.
And they'll be on I think there's 2 ways that supermarket shelves tend to get filled. One is that there's a sort of an automated inventory that is done by, the barcodes as they're going through the tills, that the shop will know that they've got, 100 of these in stock. 100 of them out the back of the shop that they can restock the shelves with. And once they sell 100 out of that 200, it'll automatically reorder some.
Yeah.
But if everybody else is reordering them, you can't get them anyway. So you might as well hold on to them and sell them and do the sort of the public good thing of saying, because in the end, it's in their interest, because you don't want those scenes like in that, Woolworths in Sydney
where these people were fighting and tearing each other's hair out.
Three people, grabbing each other, fighting, tearing each other's hair out. And look, to be reasonable, I think the woman who started the fight had a case.
I don't think she started it, though, because it looks like the other 2 women were...
She started the interaction.
Yes.
There were 2 women who had a trolley that was literally overloaded, and the big packets of toilet paper were falling out of the trolley onto the floor. And this woman said, and there was nothing left. They took everything that was on the shelf.
Yeah.
And there was nothing left there. So there's another woman came along and said, look, all I want is 1. And she went to take 1 off the trolley.
Yeah.
And then she got attacked as, you're stealing our things. These are ours.
It's one of those things where it's like...
Yeah, really? You're taking 20 packs. All I need 1. I haven't got any. I need 1. Why?
I know one. They were grabbing her, and they got done for assault. I think they
did.
Both
in the
of
end,
them got charged with assault.
In the end, the store staff had to pull them apart and call the police.
Yeah,
which is just bizarre.
It's toilet paper, people.
I know.
Just get a bidet. Yeah.
What's the chance that you're actually going to run out of toilet paper?
Yeah.
Because the worst that's going to happen is that even if you get it, you're going to be quarantined for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 or 4, how much does your average family, how much toilet paper does your average family need for
It's
even
very
a month?
bizarre.
But
I don't know. I guess it's one of those things, though, as we covered before, where you start seeing other people getting it and you freak out thinking that whether or not you get the virus, you're not going to have any for the near future. And so you do it and it gets worse and worse and worse.
That's the problem, is that, the few idiots who start the panic, they're the crazy ones. Everybody else has actually got, it's a reasonable response to saying, I don't have any.
Yeah.
It's running out. I'm going to have to go and get some.
Well, I felt so embarrassed going to buy some this week because I was
want one
actually
pack.
out of it and needed some. And I'm like, no. Like I felt, don't look at me. No one judge me.
Don't judge me. I've just got one.
Yeah, I just actually need toilet paper.
I know.
So there was that. There was actually, let's stay on that topic for a bit. So it seems like the mortality rate is about 3%, but you need to break that down into age groups and I guess health-wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like very young people young children are not dying from it.
No.
People my age are probably getting sick but aren't dying from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's your generation and the generation beyond you that are the more susceptible.
Yeah. And particularly people who've got respiratory problems. It seems to be
Yeah.
because it's a respiratory thing, it just seems to hit the respiratory system. And if you're already got a problem, then it seems obviously it's going to make it worse.
So how are they dying? Is it just that they're getting things like pneumonia, and then their organs just shut down?
Getting pneumonia, and it's a lot of these things. Pneumonia is probably the biggest killer in the world.
Yeah.
But it's a secondary thing. It's not the original infection.
Was it your dad or grandfather that had that line?
My grandfather used to say all the time, you only ever die of one thing, and that's shortness of breath. And the irony is he died of pneumonia, which meant he died of not being able to breathe.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah. So are you worried about coronavirus? Is it starting to become more and more of a fear for you personally?
I don't know.
Do you think,
it's sort of, there's a concern, but I don't know that it's got to worry. It certainly hasn't got to fear yet because, well, firstly, it's sort of inevitable.
Yeah.
It is a pandemic, but if you look at the other side of those figures...
But the flu is a pandemic, right?
The flu's a pandemic. It's just a pandemic that we just accept and we live with. So
I think stable, figures... Right? It's everywhere
worldwide,
already.
I think it was the week before last, worldwide, somewhere between 50 and 60 people died of coronavirus.
Yeah.
1,000 people died of influenza.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is the bigger killer.
Well, that's on like a weekly or something basis, right? Something crazy, I
know. So, 1,000 people a week die of influenza around the world. And yet, but we have a vaccine for that. So people can choose, and we typically get new vaccines every year. People can choose to try and prevent that from happening. At the moment, I think the fear with a new virus that comes up is that there's nothing we can do about it. You can wash your hands, do all of those preventative things, but if it's around, there's a chance you're going to catch it.
Well, I was watching a documentary recently on pandemics, and it's sort of following people working on the front line to deal with pandemics, but also the flu during flu season and everything, especially in the US. And there was a small company now that's trying to work on a universal flu vaccine that's just a one-time shot. And it's really cool because what they've done is they've taken, I think, all the flu viruses from present all the way back to something like 1912 and crammed them all into a single vaccine and given it to pigs, but they have to give them 7 shots before it starts showing.
It picks up
but then after that, they pretty much don't get sick. But their issue is no one wants 7 shots, and so that at the moment
take a series of 7 shots.
Yeah, well,
presumably
that's what they're
it'd be
working
one every
on.
couple of weeks for a period.
I don't know, but
to give your body time to kick in and then have another go and have another go. Because
if
you just went there and had 7 injections in a row, it'd be like just taking 7 times as much.
Well, no, it was a periodic thing.
Yeah, they take a series. So.
But it was interesting to see that people are working on that, at least, a holistic, universal approach to dealing with flu.
Yeah, this is an example of how much I care. I'm drinking straight out of a bottle that I've just bought from a shop. So I don't know whether this was handled well or not in the shop. Yes, I'm drinking from the cap that it was taken off, but putting things in your mouth, you don't know where they've been.
Yeah, so I was looking at it too. There was an article that was someone shared. In fact, I think it was my brother-in-law's parents who shared it on Facebook about stop saying that only elderly people are dying from it because, everyone knows elderly people and how do you think they feel? And it's significant. And I didn't realize when I was reading that article, I didn't realize it's something like almost 15% chance of dying if you contract it. Which is 1 in 6 chance. So if both my grandparents, Nan and Grandpa, who are still alive, get it, there's a third of a chance one of them will die.
Yes.
So, Yeah, is that aspect of it frightening?
Well, it is. And obviously there are always going to be people who are vulnerable, but this is a cohort of people that is age-based. It's not, if you've had pneumonia before, you're more likely to be, to suffer from it. So there are a large number of people that we all know who we would fit into elderly, and obviously I'm falling over the edge into that. And I'm cardiorespiratorily impaired. So, there's that element too. But what can you do? In the end, you just try and, do the normal, safe practices of wash your hands, don't stick your hands in your mouth or your eyes, or so.
And so, what's the Australian government doing at the moment with it? We've had our first case in the ACT, so I think now, as of today, every single state and territory of Australia has the coronavirus, and the government's pledged $15 billion or something in one way or another to fight.
Yeah, and I haven't seen the breakdown of what that's going to look like.
Well,
yet.
It looks like they're spending $2.4 billion on 100 coronavirus fever clinics, as well as a new Medicare item, which is remote health advice, I think, that you can call up. But do you think this is going to go quickly? Do you think it'll pass eventually? Or
it'll pass. Be in the news forever? Well, it won't disappear. There will always be people who will get this now.
Yeah.
Because the virus is out there. We're not going to eradicate it. But how long it takes to pass is going to be an interesting challenge. It is not a seasonal one, and that's the thing with influenza. Influenza is a winter disease. You don't catch the flu in summer, which is sort of weird when you think about the sort of medical physiology of that. Clearly, in winter we tend to get a cold. We tend to be more likely to be just a little bit off health-wise, and so I think you're more likely to get a flu.
I wonder if that's why we call it the cold.
Yeah, maybe it is. A cold disease. It's a disease I get when I'm cold.
G'day, mate. That was the first half of this episode of The Goss. If you would like to continue watching or continue listening to this episode, make sure that you sign up for the premium podcast or Academy memberships at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get full access to these entire episodes of this series and much, much more. You can go check that out using the links below, or just go to aussieenglish.com.au. Once again, thank you so much for joining me, mate, and I will see you next time. Peace.